Page 182 continued. Chapter 6, Climax and Cracks, circa AD 1000 to 1200, para. A thorough regional survey of villages granted to priests, temples, vassals and officials in northern India can be attempted on the basis of the available land charters in the 2 centuries preceding the Turkish conquest. But what has been done here is to present a conspectus wide enough to indicate the increasing trend of granting villages throughout the country, from Assam to the east to Gujarat in the west, from the Himalayas in the north to Vindhyas in the south, para. It seems that the typical village as an economic unit based on the producing activities of the peasants and artisans did not exist in Assam, for the land grants mostly referred to big plots of land being given away to the Brahmanas in the forest and hilly areas intersected by rivers, and hence not conducive to the formation of regular villages. Thus, a copper plate of Balavarma, Balavarmma, 975, refers to the grants of 4,000 measures of rice, footnote 1, and another copper plate bracket of Ratnapala, 1010250, bracket closed, speaks of a grant of land producing 2,000 measures of rice, 2. Similarly, the Guwahati copper plate of Indrapala makes a religious grant of land yielding 4,000 measures of rice, 3. These 3 instances are sufficient to show that plots of land with considerable yield continued to be granted for religious purposes, para. As we move eastwards into Bengal, ruled by the Palas and Senas, we notice villages as distinct from areas of land being transferred to the beneficiaries. Of the Pala rulers of our period, Vigrahapala III granted half a village somewhere in the present Saharsa district to a Brahmana, 4. Similarly, Madanapala, 1140-55, granted a village in North Bengal to a Brahmana from Champahitti, Campahitti, 5. The process was carried forward by the feudatories of the Palas, page 183. Ishwara Ghosha, probably a feudatory of Vigrahapala III, granted a village in South Bengal to a Brahmana from Chandavara, 6. In East Bengal, a plot of land was granted to a priest from Madhya Desha by another Pala feudatory, Bhoja Varman, sometime about the close of the 11th or beginning of the 12th century AD, 7. Para. The Chandras, possibly the feudatories of the Palas in East Bengal, also made several grants. Sri Chandra allotted by one charter for religious purposes certain plots of land scattered in 5 villages in Punravardhana Bhukti, 8, where land continued to be scarce from the Gupta period onwards. His grandson Ladha, Ladha Chandra, Ladaha Chandra, granted 2 villages along with 11 patakas and several dronas of land to the god Ladaha-Madhava, who was again granted 17 patakas of land scattered in 2 places by Viradhara Deva in the 13th century, probably in the Sylhet district, 9. Grant of villages on religious grounds continued under the Senas of Bengal, with the difference that in some cases the annual yield of the village was specified in kind and in cash. In one case, Lakshmana Sena granted a village in North Bengal with detached plots in 4 villages, 10. Under Vishwarupa Sena, 11 plots of land scattered in 6 villages altogether measuring 336.5 unmanas and yielding a total annual income of 500 puranas, were granted to a Brahmana. 11. The land charters of the 11th and 12th centuries create the impression that grants were mainly confined to what is now known as Bangladesh, where it was not possible to make grants on any lavish scale, probably on account of scarcity of land. Para. Priests and temples in Bihar did not cease to receive generous gifts of villages, although so far we have not traced any copper plates of the Karnatas of Mithila. However, we know of the grant of a village made by Samgrama Gupta sometime in the 12th or 13th century in South Munger. About the same time in the early 13th century, the Khairavalas of Japala in Palamau granted some villages and warned against the enjoyment of villages by the Brahmanas on the strength of forged charters. 12. The Khairavalas were the feudatories of the Gaharavalas, who held western Bihar for some time and granted a village to a Brahmana in the Maner, M-A-N-E-R area in 1134. 13. Page 184, para. In Uttar Pradesh, the heart of their kingdom, the Gaharavalas made the largest number of grants. As shown earlier, a single Brahmana family was granted landed property comprising at least 18 villages scattered in 18 patalas, the total number of the patalas being 14, mainly for secular services. Similarly, 6 fiefs were assigned to a Kshatriya Rauta, military functionary, and 3 villages to 3 other Rautas. 15. Para. Besides these secular assignments, many villages were granted by the Gaharavalas for religious purposes. The largest number of such grants was made by Chandra Deva, who in 1093 granted one whole patala 16 to 500 Brahmanas. We have no idea of the size of this fiscal unit, but it may have comprised at least 100 villages. To this same group of 500 Brahmanas, Chandradeva in about 1100 granted 32 villages, 2 in the very same patala which had been previously granted, with the exception of those 2 villages, and 30 in another patala. The motive for the grant of a whole patala to 500 Brahmanas does not seem to be their settlement in any backward area for its development. For the Kathehali, Kathehali, patala, bounded on 3 sides by the rivers Gomati, Bhagirathi and Barna, 17, lay near Banaras, which was one of the 2 important seats of Garbala power, the other being Kanauj. Probably it was part of a policy to placate the priests who formed an important element in the social order of Uttar Pradesh under the Gaharavalas. In any case, it is plain that about 130 villages were granted to 500 Brahmanas. Groups of villages continued to be granted to religious donis in subsequent times. Govinda Chandra re-granted 6 villages to a new set of donis, 18, and Jayat Chandra granted 2 villages, 19. Besides this, 2 or 3 villages were donated by the princes or queens of the Garhwala family with the royal consent, 20. The available records indicate that the Garhwalas granted far more villages for religious purposes than for secular, but more relevant to our argument is the fact that in addition to one whole patala, probably consisting of 100 villages, another 110 villages, 21, were held by secular and religious intermediaries as tax-free grants in an area which did not cover the whole of the modern Uttar Pradesh and hardly extended south of the Jamna. Para. The condition in the neighboring kingdom of the Chandelas, which comprised the area south of the Jamna, formed by the Bundelkhand region, was not very different. Here, most grants consisted of, page 185, single villages, and 15 villages were granted separately to secular and religious beneficiaries by the Chandela rulers, 22. If we were to analyze the position only on the basis of these grants, it would appear that secular assignees, mostly rewarded for military service, were as important as religious recipients. But this can be said only when we leave out of account a record of Paramardin. His Semra plates of 1167 grant to 309 Brahmanas villages scattered in 4 Vishayas, 23. Since only 11 places are named, it appears that only 11 villages were granted. But if we carefully examine the names, it would appear that some of these stand or groups of villages. Thus, the Pilikhini Pansela, Itava Pansela and Isarahara Pansela together represent 15 and not 3 villages. Similarly, Khatauda-Dwadashaka and Tanta Dwadashaka together signify 24 and not 2 villages, and lastly, Hat-Ashtadashaka indicates 18 villages and not 1. The other 5 place names, however, stand for single villages. The total number of villages donated by this record of Paramardin would come to 62, which is not a high figure considering 309 beneficiaries to whom the villages were donated. The grant, however, excluded the town of Madanapura and 2 villages and 4 ploughs of land attached to the town, which again confirms our hypothesis that most place names signified groups of villages rather than single villages. Besides this, we also hear of various other grants of plots of land to priests and others. What is more important is that this, as well as other records, mention the Bhattagraharas, villages granted for religious and educational purposes, from where the Brahmanas emigrated to new areas. Even if we leave out such villages, the number of the other villages granted by the Chandelas would rise in all to nearly 80, which is not a negligible figure in relation to the cultivable area of 8,000 square miles in the Bundelkhand region. Para. The Chaulukyas of Gujarat also have many grants to their credit. Most epigraphic grants made to religious donis, priests, and temples, both Jain and Brahminical, consisted of single villages, although their total would reach well above 24. But the Pravanda Chintamani, a semi-historical literary account, records that in Valakadesha, Siddharaja established Simhapura as an Agrahara of the Brahmanas, the jurisdiction of which extended over 106 villages. Page 186. The Chaulukyas built numerous temples, many of which had to be maintained, one of the endowments of villages. The Chaulukyas built numerous temples, many of which had to be maintained out of the endowment of villages. Thus, Kumarapala built as many as 1440 Jain temples, probably 1 temple in every village, 25. We have no idea of the number of villages with which these temples were endowed, but the Muslim historians provide astounding figures of the villages owned by the famous temple of Somnath. It is stated that the temple had 10,000 cultivated villages under its direct control, 26. This may sound exaggerated, but the statement that, quote, the different princes of Hindustan had bestowed in all 2,000 villages, unquote, is not beside the mark. At any rate, it is clear that no other single religious institution owned so many villages, Nalanda having only 200 villages, the highest number on record if we exclude Somnath. The Chaulukyas seem to have granted as many villages to vassals and officials as to religious donis. Even a unit of 126 villages seems to have been assigned to the king for his enjoyment as a member of the royal family, 27. Vassals and high officers were enfeoffed, enfeoffed, with large territories, and in 1209 we hear of the entire Patala granted to a high functionary who seems to have received the whole of Saurashtra Mandala as fief from Bhima Deva. 28. The Prabandha Chintamani informs us that Kumarapala granted Aliga the potter Chitrakuta Pattika containing 700 villages. 29. This may be an exaggeration, so also may be the tradition recorded in the Rasamala that a large number of northern Brahmanas, Audicyas, Audicyas, was invited to Mula Raja to Gujarat, where they were granted numerous villages, for the epigraphic evidence so far is not encouraging. 30. But the tradition that Mula Raja presented to Brahmanas the beautiful and prosperous town of Simhapura and small villages to numerous Brahmanas near Siddhapura and Sihora, 31, cannot altogether be discarded. Brahmanas were mainly brought from Kanauj and Ujjain to Gujarat, where they became the founders or heads of the Mathas. 32. In Gujarat, more grants were made to temples than to Brahmanas who acted as their priests or trustees. 33. On the whole, epigraphic and literary records of land giants are, beg your pardon, it should be a printing mistake, it should be land grants, are sufficient indication of the considerable extent of land held by religious and especially by secular beneficiaries under the Chaulukyas of Gujarat.